Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for bearing with us for the last couple of days, and thank you for bearing with us in the days to come. I know that it has at least sounded like this might take quite a while, and it very well may. And as we've all kind of talked about, and you've heard over and over and over again, your job here is to listen closely to all of the evidence. And we all hope that you do that, and I'm sure you'll give it your best shot. As the judge told you, what I'm about to do a little bit of is tell you what I believe some of the evidence in this case will be. Some of what you're going to hear over the next couple of days or weeks or however long this trial takes. And as you may have kind of surmised already from what you've heard during jury selection, this case is about public funds. This case is about public trust. This case is about public figures and the things that they did with those two things. You're going to hear from several people in this case who work for the state. You're going to hear from some law enforcement officers. You're going to hear from another former elected district attorney and his wife. And what I believe those people are going to tell you is that some of the facts in this case involve the defendant, his wife, Craig Blitzer, who's another district attorney, and his wife. And it all kind of revolves around and starts with this election in 2015. What I believe you're going to hear is that Pam Bradsher, the defendant's wife, worked for him in private practice for some time when he was a defense attorney, as you've heard. And she apparently working for him again. During the course of that employment, she worked openly, and I'm sure she did a good job for him. When he was elected district attorney, he hired his wife to work for him again. Filled out the paperwork, sent it all in to the state. She worked for 4 years for him, openly. Everybody apparently in his county knew that this was happening. And you're going to hear a little bit about three different counties actually. You're going to hear about Rockingham County. Rockingham County is, and all these are kind of northwest of Raleigh. What you'll hear is Rockingham County is the home of Craig Blitzer at the time. Okay? He eventually comes to be the elected district attorney of Rockingham County. You will also hear about Person and Caswell County. Those two counties are joined for one prosecutorial district. So they have one DA. Rockingham County has another DA. Well, the elected district attorney of Person and Caswell counties was the defendant, Wallace Bradsher. That's where Pam Bradsher, his wife, worked for him the first 4 years that he was elected to be the district attorney. As I said, she worked openly. Everybody kind of knew that that's what the deal was, at least in that area of the state. Eventually, you'll hear that Craig Blitzer, who knew the defendant from some work that they had done as private defense attorneys, kind of shared some co-defendants in that, and they had gotten to know each other a little bit. Craig Blitzer goes and talks to Wallace Bradsher, and he says, look, I've been approached to become the district attorney of Rockingham County, but I make a lot of money being a defense attorney, and I'm a little concerned about taking the pay cut to become a DA from being a defense attorney. So I'm coming to you to ask your opinions on this. He'll tell you, I believe, that the defendant's response to that was, hire your wife. It offsets the pay cut that you're getting. You pay yourself your whatever the elected district attorney salary is, and then you can bolster that by having your wife's income to come into your household. So you kind of offset that loss a little bit. At the time, it was working out for Mr. Bradsher. No one from the administrative office of the courts, which we'll talk about in a couple of moments, had said anything to him about that and said, no, you can't do that. So, hearing this and thinking, I can live with that little bit of offset funds, Craig Blitzer decides, I'm going to do it. He runs for District Attorney of Rockingham County and is elected to be the District Attorney of Rockingham County. One of the first things that you'll hear that he does is he hires his wife. She comes in, they fill out the paperwork, send it into the state, thinking everything's going to be okay. A couple weeks maybe go by. Craig Blitzer gets an email from Margaret Wiggins, who is in charge over at AOC. Now, AOC is what we're going to call it, but AOC, you'll find out, is the Administrative Office of the Courts. And you might be asking yourselves throughout the course of the trial, well, if we're talking about Rockingham, Person, and Caswell County and all this stuff is happening there, why are we worried about it here in Raleigh? Well, what you'll find out is that AOC handles all the money and the payrolls for those counties, for every 100 counties in the state, and their judicial offices, and their judicial district, which is what the district attorney's offices fall under, that branch. Well, Administrative Office of the Courts is here in Raleigh. So all the paperwork that gets filed for all these things and the paychecks that get sent out all originate here. Now the email that Margaret Wiggins sends out says, while we know it's come to our attention essentially that you've got your wives working for you, and she sends one to Craig Blitzer and one to Wallace Bradsher, she says, sorry guys, you can't do that. One, it's kind of internally against our policies. We recommend that you don't do it. But now that we've started looking into this a little bit more, and one of the reasons why they start looking into the defendant's hiring of his wife is because he sends some paperwork into AOC that he wants to give her 28% pay raise. Okay? So her pay is going to go up. Kind of flags it. They're already looking at this Craig Blitzer paperwork. They discover this. They see the two names. Say, oh, this is interesting. We need to find out if these are the wives. And they say, it's against our policy. We recommend you don't do it. But more than that, it's a violation of the North Carolina State Ethics Act. So while we say you shouldn't do it, they say you can't do it. So unfortunately, we're sorry we missed it for the first 4 years. That's our fault. But now we've caught it. We've got to do something about it. So this starts this ball rolling. And what it starts is Craig Blitzer and Wallace Bradsher trying to figure out what are they going to do. One, what's Craig Blitzer going to do because he's been counting on this income to come in for his wife? And two, what's the defendant going to do because he's had his wife working for him for 4 years? He's had that income coming in as well. They've got to sort this thing out. All they're being told from the state is you got to let them go. They cannot work for you. It is a violation of the law to have them working for you. Now, is that right that this all pops up now? But we can't do anything about that. That's where we are. AOC may feel bad about it, but it's a violation of the law. So what happens at that point is Wallace Bradsher decides to meet with Craig Blitzer at a pizza restaurant in Rockingham County. It's called Elizabeth's. Now, they all get together, sit down, and when I say they all, I mean Craig and Wallace and Pam and Cindy. They sit down at the table and they have this discussion. What are we going to do? During the course of that employment, or during the course of that discussion, the idea is raised, we'll just switch our wives. I'll send Pam to Rockingham. You send Cindy to Person Caswell. They'll switch spots where both our wives are employed. Problem solved, at least temporarily, until we can find out whether we can get a waiver or something on this ethics law. So all of this starts to occur. During that conversation, there's a discussion about Pam being a state employee and intends to work there for a period of time, and there's a discussion about the fact that Cindy is in nursing school and she wants to go back to nursing school at some point. They move on from that. They file the paperwork. AOC says, while we may not like it, we can't find anything that it's in violation of. It's not against the law for you to fire your wives and each other hire the other ones. As long as you go about it that way, fine. So that's what they do. Their wives are terminated. Their wives are each then hired. This is the wife swap, where they each get a job at the other one's office. Cindy Blitzer, for a period of time, a brief period of time, works on a case for Wallace Bradsher. It's a conflict case. There's an issue between the two DA's offices, and they kind of trade off the case and say, you handle that case for us since we have a perceived conflict of interest. And so that's the case that Cindy works on for Wallace Bradsher. She does that for a period of time, and eventually they decide that that case needs to be taken away from Cindy, and it is taken away from Cindy. And once that case is taken away, I believe what you're going to hear is that Cindy Blitzer has no work to do in that office anymore. She's never assigned another task. But she continues to get paid by the state of North Carolina for 8 hours, putting in her time in Beacon, and you'll find out what Beacon is, the timekeeping system. She puts that in. She's working for Wallace Bradsher. She's paid, and when I say working, I'll use quotation marks because she's employed by Wallace Bradsher, but she's not working. She's at home, and eventually she's in nursing school full time and still getting paid by the state of North Carolina with our tax dollars, going through AOC and back out to Cindy Blitzer through Wallace Bradsher's office. Now, at some point, before she goes into working full-time, there's a discussion that happens. And that discussion is between the defendant and Cindy Blitzer's husband, Craig Blitzer. They're in a car on the way to Ocracoke Island for a district attorney's conference. During the course of that car ride, or just before, Craig Blitzer says to Wallace Bradsher, look, my wife doesn't have any work to do. She needs this job. We need to be paid, but she's going to go back to nursing school. At that point, he'll tell you, I believe, that the defendant says, tell her not to worry about it. Focus on her school. Craig Blitzer says, okay. Goes home, tells his wife, go to school. Well, that might be the end of it all, but Cindy Blitzer continues to put in those hours. The defendant, the evidence is going to show you, knows that she's continuing to put in these hours. She continues to get paid while she's in school. At some point, some folks who work for these offices start getting upset about this and say, knock on the door at the SBI. Say, look, this is what's going on in these counties. This person's getting paid. She's not working. He knows about it. There's a scam going on, and the SBI, State Bureau of Investigation, needs to look into it. So the SBI starts an investigation. Well, before they start the investigation, they say, well, let's make sure we kind of know what's going on here. So they go in and begin to look around and see if there's anything to these allegations, and sure enough, they find that Cindy Blitzer's car keeps showing up at this nursing school during business hours. And they've talked to a couple people, and they find out, there's this kind of is making sense with what we're hearing. We at least do need to open an investigation and start looking into that. So it happens. The SBI starts an investigation. They begin to look into it, and so starts problem number 2. Problem number 2 is the cover-up. So when the SBI starts looking into all of this, and there's a lot of other things that you'll hear about, but this is the overview of it. And when the SBI starts looking into all of this, they determine that, yeah, these people are employed, they're getting paid, they seem to be putting in hours. She does seem to be going to nursing school. There's this other guy, Tyler Henderson, who's now hired over and working, employed by Craig Blitzer, who seems to be doing all of his work for Wallace Bradsher, though. They start putting the pieces together, and they continue to look into it. And they even reach out to the defendant. They reach out to Craig Blitzer. They start this investigation. They start talking to people. And during the course of all of this investigation, some efforts are made, and you're going to hear the facts about it, that the defendant takes steps to kind of cover up what's going on. And that's the second part of this. And as you've kind of heard, the charges that the defendant eventually gets charged with are obtaining property by false pretenses, conspiring with Craig Blitzer and Cindy Blitzer to obtain property by false pretenses, aiding them in their false pretense that they conduct, obstruction of justice for the cover-up, and then failing to discharge his duties as an elected official. To be sure, as I said, you're going to hear some testimony from Craig Blitzer. And we talked about it earlier in jury selection, and we've kind of laid the groundwork to let you know what's going to happen. And I believe that some of the evidence that you will hear is that Craig Blitzer pled guilty to a charge for his role in this event. Craig Blitzer will tell you that he and his wife paid back the money to the state of North Carolina that they received as a result of this fraud that they and the defendant perpetrated upon the taxpayers of the state. And he's going to tell you that he's here today to tell you all what happened. And yeah, he may have gotten some benefit for it, but he's given up his law license. He's paid that money back, and he's confessed what he has done in his role in this. And he's here to tell you all of that and to stand before you and answer to those things. And so he's going to tell you, and I want you to pay close attention to him, about his role, what he did, and what he did not do as it relates to this scheme. What he did and what Wallace Bradsher did to effectuate it all. So, that's a timeline kind of where we are. It's not everything. That's why you have to listen closely, okay? Listen closely to my questions. Listen closely to the defendant's questions. And just remember, while you're doing it, remember that promise that you all made to keep an open mind. Pay close attention. And at the end of all of this, when you do that, I'm going to stand back up here and I'm going to tell you what I think all of that evidence means and how I think you should apply those facts to the law that Judge Ridgway gives you, and why, if you do all of that, the logical conclusion for you is going to be that you will find the defendant guilty. Thank you.